My name is Maddox Angerhofer. I work in strategic engagement here at the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies, and I'll be hosting our episode of Arctic Connections today. Joining me on the podcast today, I have our guest, Colonel Pete Larsen. Thank you, Pete, for joining us.
Thanks, Maddox, for having me. This is an honor to be here.
Yeah, certainly. Colonel Larsen's had a distinguished career in security cooperation. He served as the political military advisor to the Assistant Secretary for the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau at the Department of State. He was also the air attaché to Israel, and throughout this career, he developed deep regional expertise in security cooperation in the Middle East, which he then brought to the upper echelons of national security and defense leadership in the U.S., serving on the National Security Council, serving the Joint Staff, and also at the National War College. Colonel Larsen began his career with the Air Force, commissioning out of the University of North Carolina's ROTC program. He then amassed over 1,700 C-130 flight hours as a pilot. And now today, he serves as the head of Air Force engagement for Textron, which is a multi-industry conglomerate with portfolios in defense and aviation. He is also pursuing a PhD in emerging technology policy, which I'm excited to talk to you about later on. And lastly, he serves as the president of the Foreign Area Officers Association, which is a nonprofit that strengthens national security by educating the public about foreign area officers' role in global security. So thanks again for joining us, Colonel Larsen. Excited to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, this will be fun. Looking forward to the conversation.
Certainly. So we've got kind of three topics we're hoping to touch on today. The first being the security cooperation enterprise overall. Secondly, security cooperation in the Arctic. And lastly, the future of security cooperation. So I want to start on the security cooperation enterprise broadly and maybe take a look at it through your experience, through your perspective. So can you start maybe by walking us through your career? You started as a pilot. How did you become a foreign area officer? What was that journey like to the NSC, to the Joint Staff, to where you are now with the Foreign Area Officers Association?
Sure, Matt. Well, when I look back, I remember when I was just a young lieutenant in the Air Force, we had kind of a small exercise at our base in North Carolina. And we had some international folks that flew into this event. I think they called it the Air Mobility Command Rodeo was the name of it. The fly-off type of competition. And there were some international partners there. And by luck, I got assigned as a lieutenant to work with the international partners as they came in. I had already had a bachelor's degree in poli-sci, international affairs, but never thought I was really going to use it in any way in my career. And anyway, this was just a great event. I really loved working with those international partners. And I realized how important it is for the United States to have like strong, enduring relationships with these partners. And then, of course, 9/11 kicks off, or 9/11 happens, and the wars that kick off afterwards in Iraq. You're working with international partners all the time. And, it just made an impression on me at a point in my career when I was still learning. And then during the Iraq War, Donald Rumsfeld, they had this big study on kind of what we could have done better in Iraq. I think it was conducted by James Baker. You can still publish the report on Amazon. I think it's called the Iraq Report. But in that study that they commissioned, they had about 70 items of things that we could have done better as a country. And about the last 10 of them were all related to things that we could have done better with our partners and understanding the region and understanding Arabic and all these types of things. And I remember seeing that, and that also made an impression on me as well. And it was that pamphlet or that study that led to Donald Rumsfeld at the time basically saying, hey, why don't we have more military folks that understand the region, that type of thing. And they knew they had an Army FAO program, and all the services had some version of a FAO program. but really the most formal one was the Army's. And as I understand it at that time, Donald Rumsfeld and some DoD orders commanded the other services to kind of model their programs after the Army's. The Air Force was basically told, hey, make the program, which involved a graduate degree in the region of expertise, language. You have to at least be on a certain skill level on your foreign language capability, and also some in-country training. So the Air Force starts this program, and then they advertise it to all the officers to apply. Well, there were, about 850 applications that came in for this because it looked really interesting. I forgot about it after I put the application in, and then one day I get called up to the front office and said, "Hey, did you put in this application for this thing?" And I go, "Yeah." And they're like, "Well, you got it." And it was Arabic and Middle East, and I was like, "Whoa, okay." I thought I was going to get German and Europe or something like that. And anyway. It was great because the Middle East was absolutely fascinating in learning about that. So I go out to MPS and get my degree in Middle East Studies, and then go up on the hill to the Defense Language Institute and learn Arabic there, and then came back to DC and learned Hebrew, and then went off to Israel as an attaché. I absolutely love that job. As most FAOs that do attaché work do. It's just a fascinating, fun position where you're kind of at the national security level, where you're actually implementing things that are coming out of the White House and the National Security Council on the ground, but you're also at the tactical level, making sure you understand the country that you're in. A lot of people say that, to be an attaché, you have to know kind of two languages, and people always, it is true you have to know a foreign language, but really what they mean is you have to understand kind of geopolitics and regional politics and the military. So you kind of have that a little bit of State Department to you, but you also have to have that Title 10 to you to understand that as well, what's going on there. Absolutely loved it. And then I went off to command a squadron that did building partnership capacity for Africa. So I was sending teams into Africa to train African nations after that. Loved that job. That was out of New Jersey, and we're sending the teams out in New Jersey. I got that job because I was a foreign area officer. And then went from there, to the Joint Staff and State Department and Joint Staff. And then the National Security Council, all with regional focused jobs. And, I think most people that do this type of work, whether you're in the military, at a think tank, a regional center, like what you're doing up there, you're doing it because you have an absolute passion for it. And I think that's kind of across the board for all the types of positions and folks that work on these types of issues. And FAOs are the same. Most FAOs I've ever met have a passion for what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on like that shared passion across the whole enterprise, talking about the growth of the FAO programs, across the different services, starting with the Army, to the Air Force and the other services, but also across the interagency, like you started to mention, because, of course, the security cooperation enterprise is, a huge group of people all working towards that mission. So thinking about that security cooperation enterprise, you started just there to segue in to where I wanted to go next was we've got FAOs working with the military services, serving as attachés, kind of that in-between of the military and the Department of State. Who are some of the other players involved in the security cooperation mission? Of course, at the Ted Stevens Center, we're very familiar with DSCA, the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, our executive agency, as well as the other regional centers. But there's lots of other people involved, not just on the Department of War side, but the interagency. We have the National Guard State Partnership Program. Like I mentioned, the other regional centers, Department of State. Who else are we missing? Can you zoom out and give us that sort of 30,000-foot view of all of the players that are involved in this?
There's a lot. I don't know if I can name them all, but I can definitely touch on the ones that I tended to spend a lot more time with in my career. You know, first of all, a FAO, I'll start there. A FAO kind of has three pillars, as we call it, of career that you can go. And you can cross over. There's nothing that's stopping you, and a lot of people do. But generally speaking, there's three types of positions that FAOs go into. One would be an attaché. And just to touch on that, an attaché is, you know, they're there to understand what is going on in the country, to be briefing the ambassador, to be working with the partner nation generals, to work with the COCOM so the COCOM understands what's going on in that country, where the friction points are, that type of thing. So they're very busy. A lot of people only think they're going to receptions every night and then that's it. Well, they are doing that, but then they're back at the embassy normally at 7 in the morning. So it's actually a pretty tough job what those attachés are doing out there. And then the second pillar that a FAO could do would be security cooperation. So most of my career, those were called SCOs, security cooperation officers. The terminology, I think, has recently changed to call them part of the MIL groups instead of the SCO offices. And then the last one would be to be in the actual command, so like CENTCOM or INDOPACOM, that type of thing. Normally in the fives, the J5s of those organizations, where they're helping interpret what's going on in those countries and ensuring that any type of plan or partnership that we're doing it in the right way. So that's kind of the FAO part of it. But also you have your intel services that are over there that are part of the national security enterprise for sure. An very important part. You have your state colleagues and multiple different flavors and types of roles that they have in the embassy as well as part of that country team. You have your econ officers and you have your political officers and all those different types of things. And they're doing incredibly important work. And then commerce. Commerce often gets forgotten about as part of this enterprise, but they're actually a huge part of the enterprise. And why they're important is they're promoting the U.S. Companies that are trying to compete in those countries. And they really do a remarkable job with their advocacy programs and that type of thing. So there are some big ones. And then, of course, at the higher levels, you have the National Security Council and the different regional directorates that are there that are kind of coordinated in the interagency and making sure that it's in sync. Treasury has a role, actually multiple roles. Depending on the country you're in, there may be some problems with sanctions and that type of thing, and they're going to be lead for that. USTR is going to be leading all the trade pieces, and really these pieces do come together in the security cooperation realm. The other piece that I'll say is Congress, and they've had more of a role in the last few decades, especially since Senator Leahy, passed his Leahy amendment and that type of thing. Because really that serves as kind of a litmus test that if you're going to actually build the capacity of a partner, you have to make sure the partner doesn't have gross, like human rights problems and that type of thing. So it's a big enterprise. It really is. And at first it can seem a little overwhelming. Hey, what's everybody else doing here when I get into the embassy? But really, what at least my experience was is the country team forms this really unique interagency team and really gets it done.
Yeah, certainly. I can definitely see how that, is exactly like a team sport, working on a team there within the country and bringing together all those different interagency pieces that you mentioned that, might each have their own sort of sub-goal, but ultimately are working to advance the national security and defense priorities that are shared for that region. When it comes to the Foreign Area Officers Association, Is that organization dedicated specifically just to FAOs? Are there other international specialists involved? What does that sort of group that you work with look like?
No, that's a great question. I like talking about this one. The association was started in 1996 by some Army FAOs way back when. So we're actually celebrating our 30th anniversary this year of the association. It's taken some twists and turns over those 30 years, and they've done some great things. Ultimately, they do ensure that the folks that are focused on the security cooperation enterprise and the national security enterprise understand what FAOs do and what their part is in this enterprise. But no, we're not just limited to FAOs. Matter of fact, we spent a lot of time over the last year converting from our nonprofit status to a 501c3, which opens the doors to anyone that wants to join. And we certainly have our fair amount of State Department folks, industry folks, all those folks that are interested in security cooperation. Matter of fact, we're bringing in now. We want to help serve the men and women that serve in the State Partnership Program as bilateral affairs officers, which are those officers that do the State Partnership Program for the National Guard. So we're always growing. We had 70% growth last year. It's incredible.
Wow.
As we increase our programs to serve. And we really are trying to serve these men and women that are out there doing this job.
It sounds like it. And yeah, bringing in that whole group under one big tent is certainly no small task. I want to touch on now something you mentioned earlier related to those men and women serving in these capacities and what makes them successful. What type of person does it take to be a successful FAO or other security cooperation practitioner? And you had mentioned FAOs in particular have to know at least 2 languages, but really it's more than that because they're fusing the tactical to the strategic, the military perspective with the Department of State diplomatic view. So maybe you would say that's one of the skills or capabilities that's key for a FAO to be successful, but what are the other qualities that make someone really excel in this field, besides the passion, besides that sort of ability to translate across different languages?
No, well, that's a lot of it. That's a great starting point, what you just said, to be honest. But to add to that, I think ultimately you have to have some credibility to be in this country, right? You're really wearing, you are the face in many instances of the country at different events, high-level meetings. Most attachés are going to be sitting across from the chiefs of defense or even the presidents of these countries at some point within their time in these countries. So you have to be credible. You have to have a certain amount of humility, I think, to do the job. And you also have to have, I think, that kind of intellectual curiosity and appreciation for other cultures, of course. At the end of the day, you are in this other culture, and you have to have enough awareness to work within that culture to try to understand it. Because really, one of the reasons you're there is to translate that back in a way that benefits the U.S. national security interests. So you're kind of out there. You can't do it if to go back to those qualities we mentioned, if you don't try to be aware of the culture you're in and that type of thing and what that means, you can really steer the ship the wrong way when it comes to your advice going back to the national security enterprise that you're serving.
Yeah, that cultural awareness or, just curiosity even to try and build better understanding of the region you're serving in, the country you're serving in, really sounds like a key component here of, someone who's going to be that point of contact to help support the senior leaders working on strategic issues or tactical issues in whatever country you're serving in. The theme of Arctic Connections, the podcast we've been thrilled to have you join us on, is connecting the Arctic to the world and the world to the Arctic. So I want to move towards our second topic today, which is security cooperation in the Arctic. And I'm going to ask you to make that connection between the world and the Arctic. Looking back on your experience, whether as a FAO or maybe in one of your more recent roles in the security cooperation space, are there lessons learned or takeaways that you had that you see, maybe you saw in your work in the Middle East that you think apply to the Arctic or maybe from elsewhere? I don't want to limit what experiences you draw on, but especially thinking about the Arctic as a region that's, arguably in flux right now. There's, some history of really strong cooperation and international collaboration, that sense of Arctic exceptionalism that's been, spoken about many times, compared to now with growing national security, global security, really interest in the Arctic, and greater attention on the space as a key arena of competition and not just a peripheral. So there's lots of directions you could go with that, but we'll leave it to you to make that connection from the Arctic to the world and back.
No, I love the question. Not being specifically a regional expert of the Arctic, I can just draw on what I've learned about the security cooperation in general and the national security enterprise and kind of the tools that we use. What comes to mind for me when I think about this is one thing that we can do is think of material solutions all the time to solve problems, whether it's ice-breaking ships or satellites to enhance the security and give us more of an advantage in the Arctic and our allies more of an advantage. But at the end of the day, that those things all matter. There's no doubt about it. Very, very important to national security. But at the end of the day, the connective tissue that makes security cooperation happen is relationships and credibility and trust. And I forgot who said you can't surge trust, but it's certainly a truism in the security cooperation space. I think that when I think of this, I think of the relationships of the 6 NATO allies that we have in the Arctic region, and really it goes beyond that. And there's just so many. When I went through and looked through at all the different exercises that have happened just over the last couple of years in the Arctic, whether they were in Norway or Finland, everywhere else, all of those take people and relationships to build and make them effective. And when you think about the great power competition that's really happening in the Arctic, we see it with Russia and China. I truly believe that part of deterrence is the relationships you have, and it just makes sense, right? It's just kind of logical that if your competitor sees that you have partners and those partners have specialties that can also deter, it's a really strong thing. And when you go back to the security cooperation space, you have these attaches out there. And again, they're just part of this amazing team out there. They're just one piece of it. But they are an important piece. And they're in these state capitals, whether it's in Oslo or wherever else. And they're the ones that on a daily basis are building that credibility for our country and on the mill-to-mill side. So I think that, to your question, I think that there is absolutely 100% a strong reason that we have attachés and security cooperation enterprises in the Arctic. I will say some unique features as I thought about the Arctic when it comes to security cooperation, because one thing about it is security cooperation in Africa is going to look different than it's going to look in the Arctic for many different reasons. There are state partnership programs, for example, in the Arctic. We have, I think it's Minnesota and Norway, and I think Virginia is with I forgot which country, but there's at least two formal relationships there. The reason I talk about the state partnership program for a second is because that program is a persistent relationship that builds trust between the two countries it could be over decades, right? I think the Norway one is over decades. And that's extremely important when you need to call upon that relationship for a deterrent situation or for whatever it is. You want to have those relationships in place that you can't surge for later. So I do think that the role of security cooperation is absolutely critical, and I think it's still there. The one thing that the kind of the strategy may flux a little bit, but at the end of the day, the relationships, as I know them, are really strong. The mill-to-mill relationships, and again, it starts with those attachés. It's not only them; they're just a piece of it, but they're the ones that are going to be leading the charge when they're bringing in the generals from DC into the mix and all those types of things to make sure that the whole relationship is smooth. So I think that it's security cooperation and security assistance, all those things, interoperability. It matters in the Arctic just as much as it does anywhere else.
Definitely. And when you talk about trust as, maybe a building block or a component of deterrence because of that relationship you could develop with allies and the way that, expands our own capabilities, having those partners we can draw on. Is there an example that comes to mind to you from your career or, something you witnessed of, maybe an attaché who, did something that really helped build that trust with a partner? Is there, something concrete you can point to that you noticed that trust building happening, that relationship building, whether it's, military to military or, other interactions? Is there one that comes to mind to you?
Yeah, I mean, look, and at the end of the day, there's countless relationships. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things the association did, the Foreign Area Officer Association, long before I was a part of it, is they sponsored one of the museum walls, if you will, in the Pentagon, and it's between corridors 7 and 8, I believe, and it's the FAO corner. It's the Foreign Area Officer corner. And it just does this great job of showing the history of these types of things that FAOs have done over the years to strengthen these relationships in exactly what you're talking about. And there's just this incredible history that goes back, quite frankly, way before we had something officially called the Foreign Area Officer. These international focused military officers that really get these things done and help smooth out the relationships, build the interoperability, all that. Sure, there's plenty of examples, personal examples where the attaché is either the person that is relieving the friction points that might be there between two countries because they really do understand the budget constraints, the political constraints, all those things that they're tasked to understand. Their job is to understand those things in the country they're in. And sometimes things that might seem easy in a COCOM might not be an option once you add the factors that only that attaché understands, and then they're the ones to raise up and go, "Hey, sir, I don't think this is going to work because of this, or it can work, but we need to do this first." It's that type of things, those types of things that the attaché or the security cooperation can offer to the decision makers.
I'm so glad you pointed out that role of identifying the friction points and kind of understanding both sides, right? Of, the combatant command maybe priorities and whether or not those are feasible or what tweaks need to be changed or need to be made in order to accomplish those goals. Because I think so much of the time that can be a really big challenge in creating interoperability and strong partnerships, is just that there's, misunderstandings and missed opportunities to resolve those friction points. So I wanted to ask you, from your experience, maybe as the air attaché in Israel, or maybe other experiences you've had working with really technologically advanced partners and really capable partners, what are the friction points that you encounter there that might be different from working in more of a capacity building capacity, if you will, where you might be working with an ally or partner that it's more of a one-way transfer of information, versus when we look at the Arctic region, so many of our partners and allies are extremely capable, both technologically, tactically. I think about partnerships like the binational command with Canada of NORAD, which is historic and has that long history, and is also modernizing as we speak and becoming perfectly capable for future threats. Another one that comes to mind that you touched on earlier with ice breaking would be Ice Pact, with Canadian again and Finnish allies that can provide the utmost world-renowned best practice expertise in ice capable shipping. So when you think about working with that type of partner towards interoperability rather than capacity building, where are the friction points that you find? Is it resourcing? Is it where would you point those out?
No, look, that's a great question. It really is, and there are 100%. Your friction points are going to change when you're working with a country that's as technologically advanced as yourself. These countries have first of all, their own governments, right? And their own parliaments, and with that, their own policies. And so a lot of times, the policies themselves, their policies on classifications, what they're allowed to do in an exercise, what their rules of engagement are, get a little more sophisticated in these technologically advanced countries. And, sometimes the policies themselves are going to brush up against each other. So the other part of it too is sometimes you can have, I don't know necessarily with the Arctic, but certainly with at least some of our partners in the Arctic, you can have competitions on the industrial base and what you're trying to do there. When it comes to arms transfers and sales and all that type of thing. We're certainly seeing that right now with our European partners. The other thing that I'll say is a way you can, for these types of partners, to overcome these types of frictions is through exercising together. That's where a lot of these things are going to bubble up. If you're working together in an ops center or whatever with your partner and you're running through, you're running through the different scenarios that you might have to do in the future in a simulated environment. Those types of policy issues, classification issues, all those different types of things are naturally going to start to show themselves, so you can work through them. So really, the more exercises you do and the more communication, the more those friction points are going to bubble up. So you can figure out how to work around them.
Yeah, those exercises as where the rubber literally meets the road, and things either work or they don't, and pushing it to the breaking point like that, it can a lot of times it seems to be really helpful in identifying those areas of friction and how to overcome them. I want to turn to our third and final topic here on the future of security cooperation. So a little bit perspective here. Given today's top defense priorities, or maybe given today's top defense threats as you see them, I want to just start by asking you just broadly, where is the future of security cooperation headed? And I don't want to bias your response here, whether it be functional, regional, or some other direction. So I'm going to throw out that big, gigantic question for you right at the start.
No, I think it's a great question, and first of all, just as technology is advancing, the role of a security cooperation officer or attaché or whatever that might be. At first glance, you might go, well, what do we need an attaché anymore for if I can just chat GTP what the cultural environment is in this country or whatever and answer it that way. Or a security cooperation program, just put it all on some type of algorithm to make it all happen. But I would challenge that and say, at the end of the day, again, it's about trust and relationships, and you're not going to get there without that, without those relationships. I will say that as we grow into the space realm and that type of thing, we've seen already that there is a need for these types of experts, even in that space, and we're seeing it. So I think the Space Force is standing up their own version of a FAO right now, and I think they've even named kind of their first cohort, if I'm correct. I'm not positive on that, so that's very exciting. I think right now you've seen a shift in the emphasis on our defense industrial base and strengthening that through security cooperation. It's always been there, but I just think the emphasis is stronger now than maybe we've seen it before. Where when you go to foreign military sales and those types of things, we want to make sure we're seeing the linkages to whatever you're doing in that space to our defense industrial base back home. The other thing that I'll say is, of course, everybody is seeing the importance of burden sharing and what that means. And we're seeing some of the early challenges as we expect our partners to burden share. And with that, it's not all about how much a partner spends. Burden sharing isn't just money. It comes in other ways too. How they sustain, how they participate in exercises, what they give as far as access, and those types of things. So there's and what their political will is. That's also burden sharing. It's not just what their budget says it is. So I do see that shifting a little bit right now, and that's kind of my my initial thoughts.
Certainly. When you talk about the emphasis on the domestic sort of U.S. defense industrial base as a component of security cooperation, as something that can be advanced through security cooperation, does advancing our defense industrial base require engagement with different partners than in the past for security cooperation practitioners? Or is it looking like, their job is, staying the same, but there's other people who are involved? What does that look like with bringing in more of private industry, having them be a bigger part of that international security cooperation?
No, that's an excellent question. And I think the Pentagon is working really hard on that question themselves right now. And they're spending a lot of time trying to answer that question, and have some really smart people looking at it. I think that, yes, it does, in fact, require a different mindset, because if that's one of your named goals, is to ensure that the defense industrial base is healthy and strong and ready for the future. And you're looking at these types of, as an example, if you have a certain piece of kit that you're trying to sell to a partner or a group of partners, you want to make sure, and you want to again draw those lines back to the factory, and that can happen in multiple ways as we see. But examples are, can the factories, are they capable right now of, with their workforces and factory lines, to build whatever that is? Do we need that factory to keep? Sometimes foreign military sales can be a way to keep a factory line hot. In other words, to keep it producing its thing, because maybe the U.S. need for it is not as strong right now, but it may be there in the future. So that's where foreign military sales can be extremely important to the defense industrial base, is to keep those factory lines hot that would not be otherwise. Because once a factory loses a reason to produce what it's producing, it has to shut down that line. So we don't want to shut down certain lines, but yet maybe we have enough of whatever that kit is, and those are some of the types of things that we have to think about when it comes to foreign military sales and the role of industry, and how those all connect.
Yeah, I'm glad you explained kind of some of those efficiencies that can be gained by, leveraging demand from international partners, right, for defense industrial products or manufacturing capacity that we might not, meet the same scale without those international partners. So I think that was a really good point to highlight, and I just wanted to foot stomp exactly what you said. You also touched on burden sharing. Another one of the sort of top line defense priorities coming out of the National Defense Strategy is, stronger, more burden sharing among allies and partners. For security cooperation practitioners, for FAOs, does that mean we're asking more of them, or are we asking them to do something differently? What does that mean when we say more burden sharing?
Yeah, I mean, getting back at it, I do think there is. There is a financial piece to it as part of their budgets, and we want to see that go up. Look, we've wanted to see that go up for decades, really, even with our European partners. But it's more than that too. Like I said, it's about ensuring that they have real capabilities that can deter themselves. That's burden sharing, right? We want them, if they are our ally, and even in Arctic here, we want to make sure they have capabilities that deter our competitors there, that they're sustaining their forces, all those different types of things. And getting back to kind of the security cooperation piece, that's certainly a piece of it. And really, for the folks that have to make these tough decisions, one of the big things that comes up in kind of the foreign military sales world is co-production. So co-production would be where it's kind of like what the word sounds like. You would work with another country to produce a piece of kit together. It's really good, in that case, it's good for that country's, if you're going to put a factory up in another country, a partner country, they're going to benefit with their workforce. So if we're focused on our own workforce and our own defense industrial base, you can see those types of competitions or friction points, going back to friction, that really happen. So, hey, no, we need the factory to be here. We need to be building it here to get to benefit our defense industrial base. These are the types of conflicts we're seeing right now, is even on, if you're going to co-produce together.
Right, and presumably, when that co-production initiative reaches, success, if you're able to do that, that's got to be a real trust-building measure, right? Because then we're both dependent on the same sort of supply chain. We're co-producing it, we're collaborating, we're in it together. And so it just comes back to exactly what you said about trust being that basis of security cooperation, of deterrence, of the whole puzzle. I want to just maybe bring things full circle. When you started off describing your career, you talked about this capability gap that was identified, following Iraq, about the lack of understanding for, some local pieces of the region, and the FAOs, moving beyond the Army into the other services as a way to fill that capability gap. It sounds like, from what I've, heard from you talking today, part of the role of a FAO, right, is identifying those capability gaps now and trying to bring U.S. capabilities and capacities to bear on those gaps, and also identify where can our partners and allies shoulder that burden of bridging the gap. Does that sound right to you? What is the central role of FAOs or of security cooperation practitioners in terms of capability gaps and bridging those gaps?
Yeah, 100%. I think that by country, remember these FAOs are typically in their countries anywhere between 1 to 3 years, depending on the country that they're in. uh, they're going to before they go out, they're going to study their country really to a great length. They're going to go, to all the different intelligence agencies, that type of thing, to learn everything they can about where they're going. And then they're going to get there and they're going to start piecing together themselves through the conversations they're having. And they're going to add to that conversation. You remember, they're there to add to the understanding of the decision makers, and understand what those gaps are. And they're going to quickly understand what they are. And their job is to translate those gaps. But yeah, I think that is a great way to put it, is that one of their key tasks is to understand what those gaps are in the name of really in the name of U.S. national security.
Certainly. We're coming close to the close of our time, but before you go anywhere, I wanted to ask you if there's more you can share about your PhD research on emerging tech policy. Given your background, I would suspect there's maybe some international component to that research, especially given you're doing it at George Mason Schar School. But can you tell us more about that research? What are you looking into? Is there an international component?
Yeah, there is. There is an international component because there's an international component to these emerging technologies in themselves. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to show really through the early stages of nuclear, so kind of the first couple decades of nuclear technology, the first couple decades in the 70s of biotechnology, and show, like, how did we regulate these technologies when we were terrified of them, or a lot of people thought that they were going to end the world or be great for the world, and there were these huge debates and with those two technologies. And so I look at those in depth. I go back and I talk to the actual people that were parts of those technologies as they were emerging. They're not emerging anymore. They're here. Well, AI is emerging, right? And so really, I'm a strong believer in that, you can look back in history and pull some key points out of it that fit now. And there really are, as you dig back into those first 20 years of nuclear and the first 20 years of biotech, to see where we are right now with the uncertainty of AI. And of course, there are some, when you really look at the factors that change how the regulation unfolds, national security, going back to your question, ends up being kind of the key moderator in my hypothesis. It really does moderate the regulation. So if you end up in a so-called race, then it's going to change how the country regulates. And we see that right now with AI. There's all kinds of debates, even this week, on how we regulate AI. So national security, to your point, is a huge part of that because of the races to reach where we need to with those technologies.
Yeah, to your point about some of those technologies that were emerging at one point and now are very much here with us. I can remember back when I was in school in DC, people calling the Arctic an emerging issue of national security, and it definitely feels like it has emerged.
I think that's a great way of putting it. The Arctic is it truly is a center of great power competition right now. And I think it's only going to continue to be.
Certainly. I wanted to ask you one other thing. If people are interested in getting in touch with you or with the Foreign Area Officers Association, what's the best way to learn more about the association or get in touch with you and your team?
Yeah, so really just write to the word membership at FAOA.org. That's the best way to get in touch with us, and we'll get back to you.
All right, so we know where to find you then. Well, I want to say thank you so much for making the time to join us here, not in studio, but online, as always, connecting with this podcast from the Arctic all across the U.S. and all across the world. So thank you so much, Colonel Larsen. Really appreciated your time, and I think our listeners are going to appreciate the conversation as well.
Oh, it's been a blast, Maddox. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much.
All right. No, that was fun. That was good.